Hi everyone, John Connearn here with Neural DSP, and welcome to this deep dive into CorOS 3.1.0. This update includes new features, devices, and plugin compatibility for Soldano SLO100X and the Fortin Nameless Suite X. So let's dive in and explore everything this update has to offer. This update brings new features and several quality of life improvements, including the ability to import plugin-compatible presets to Quad Cortex via Cortex Control. In Cortex Control, select the directory at the top, go to the Plugin Presets tab on the left, choose the plugin that you want to import presets to, and select the user folder. Here, you can either click and drag the files into this window, or select the click and drag button and locate the files in your computer's directory and import them from there. Once loaded, these presets are available in the plugin's user folder in the directory, and these are accessible both on the Quad Cortex and in Cortex Control. So as you can see, that preset is now available on the grid to use in Quad Cortex. Here's how it sounds. So that's how you import plugin-compatible presets into your Quad Cortex. It's worth noting that when importing plugin presets, they need to be from the X series of our plugins. Also, make sure you're running the latest version of Cortex Control. Being able to import these presets makes running plugins on Quad Cortex even more versatile. In CorOS 3.1.0, you can rename stomp assignments in stomp mode gig view. To do this, make sure you're in stomp mode by cycling through the modes at the top. Go into gig view, and now with any of the stomp assignments, we can select the rename icon, type in our desired name, and select save. This allows you to personalize your gig view when in stomp mode. Another new feature is that stomp mode now supports momentary foot switch behavior. To do this, select the block on the grid that you'd like to have momentary foot switch behavior. Here, I'll select the doubler. Select the foot switch assign button, and here you have a choice of two options. You can select latching or momentary. I'll select momentary and assign it to foot switch A. Now this block is only engaged when holding down the assigned foot switch. This can be really useful for momentary effects and can be assigned to any bypassable block on the grid, except the looper. To demonstrate this, I'm going to play, let a note ring out, and momentarily engage the doubler so you can hear its effect. And that is how to use momentary foot switches in stomp mode. In this update, master volume knob assignments can now be set after adjusting the master volume knob. As I adjust the volume control, you'll see our assignments display on screen. From here, we can select or deselect the assignments to our preference. A handy feature as part of this update is the ability to bulk edit the names of presets, neural captures, and impulse responses in the directory. To do this, select the folder that you'd like to bulk edit in the directory. Select the bulk edit icon. From here, you can select the presets you want to bulk edit, or alternatively, you can use the icon at the top left to select all presets. Here, you can then select the rename icon. And we have a few options here. First, let's rename them all to new preset. And select save. This has now listed all of the presets as new preset in numerical order. Alternatively, we could select them all and rename them. And with their current names, we can add a prefix to these names. From here, we could select them all again. And then with the match option, we can find a common word in our preset names and replace it with another. On top of this, we now have the option to bulk edit metadata for presets and neural captures. I'll select all the presets again, go into rename, select metadata, and choose my preferred instrument. And there we have it. That covers it for the new features added to Quad Cortex as part of this CorOS 3.1.0 update. CorOS 3.1.0 brings exciting new devices to all Quad Cortex users, including the US DLX64 Vintage, a harmonic tremolo, the Crying Wah from Hell, the Chief OC2, as well as a subharmonic synth. Let's start with the US DLX64 Vintage amplifier. I'm going to go to an empty space on the grid, select Amp, and now select US DLX64 Vintage, and also pair it with a complementary cab. So now that it's loaded onto the grid, let's hear how it sounds with its default settings. Immediately there, you can hear that vintage, clean, pushed breakup tone. Now let's push it even further by rolling the volume up. Let's push this even further, almost all the way up. And now we're getting into a crunch rhythm territory. For now, I'm going to keep this at midday. So let's bring that back to around 5 and move on to the EQ section. Here we have two controls. We have a treble and a bass. We can darken up our tone by bringing the treble back. Or we can brighten it up. Let's increase the treble to around 8. This can be really handy when using a guitar with humbuckers, just to give it a bit more cut and bite to cut through. Moving on, let's reset the treble to around midday and move on to bass. Similarly, we could bring this back and take some of the weight out of the sound. Or we could fatten it up and increase the bass to around 8. And that's great for thickening up chords or single note lines as well. Let's bring this back to midday and move on to the input. This input toggle switch allows us to have two input modes, high and low. If you're using a guitar with a lower output, you may want to switch it to high mode just to give the amp a bit more push and drive. Currently, we're in high mode and it sounds like this. Let's toggle this to the low mode. For now, let's reset it back to high. Next, we have a mode drop-down menu. This is going to refer to various different models of this amplifier. You'll see that we have options of normal, vibrato, and vibrato bright off. First, let's hear how the normal model sounds. Now let's take a listen to the vibrato mode. And finally, let's take a listen to the vibrato bright off mode. As you can hear, these each offer a different character and react to your playing differently. Finally, we have an output dial, just to give you that final level of control over the master volume of the amplifier. Now let's move on to the next new device, the harmonic tremolo. Unlike a regular tremolo that modulates the volume up and down, a harmonic tremolo splits the signal into high and low frequencies and modulates them independently, creating a more complex psychedelic sound. To load this on the grid, I'm going to select an empty space, go into modulation, scroll down to harmonic tremolo, and add it to the grid. Now we have it loaded on the grid, let's hear how it sounds. When we open up the harmonic tremolo, you'll see the first control is the rate. This is measured in hertz, and it's the rate at which the volume of the highs and lows modulate. We could decrease the rate for a slower and more subtle modulation effect. Conversely, we could increase this for a much more vivid and obvious harmonic tremolo effect. Next to this, we have a sync toggle switch. As I engage the sync function, you'll see that the rate is now grayed out. This is because the rate of the modulation is set to the tempo of quad cortex. Next to the sync toggle switch, you'll see that we have a sync note subdivision parameter, and this is going to change the modulation rate in relation to the tempo. Currently, we're set to a half note triplet, and here's how that sounds. Now let's change this to a dotted 16th note, and here's how it sounds. We can increase this all the way to a 32nd note. Here's how that sounds. For now, I'm going to set this at a quarter note triplet, and now let's have a look at the sync on toggle switch. Here we have the option to choose whether the highs or the lows of the harmonic tremolo start on the downbeat. Let's change it to highs, and here's how that sounds. And now let's reset it to lows and hear how that sounds. Next to this, we have the depth parameter. This relates to how much the volume of the highs and lows are modulated. At 100%, you'll get the full dynamic range of the tremolo effect. At a value of 50%, you'll have a more subtle tremolo effect. If you reduce this further, you'll have an even less notable harmonic tremolo effect. Now let's reset this to 100 and move on to the waveform. When selecting this drop-down menu, you'll see that we have a few options. We have a sine wave, triangle, square, saw up, and saw down wave. We've been hearing the sine wave up to now, so I'm going to switch it to the triangle, and here's how that sounds. Next, let's take a listen to the square wave. Now, let's take a listen to the saw up wave. And finally, let's take a listen to the saw down wave. For the time being, I'm going to set this to a square wave and move on to the duty cycle parameter. This parameter affects the groove and feel of the harmonic tremolo by altering the width of the waveform. By turning the parameter into positive percentage values, we'll be increasing the width of the waveform. Here's how it sounds at around 60%. By turning this parameter into minus percentage values, we'll have a narrower waveform. This effect is most noticeable with a square wave, but for now, I'm going to change it to a sine, and here's how it would sound. The next parameter is the smoothing dial, and this allows for a less drastic change between the highs and lows. To demonstrate this, I'm going to go back to a square wave, and here's how it sounds with smoothing at 0%. Let's introduce some smoothing and see how that affects the sound. Here's how it sounds with smoothing at 100%. Now I'm going to reset the waveform to sine, reset the duty cycle to 0%, as well as take the smoothing off and move on to the LFO active toggle switch. This is a switch that lets you fade the effect in and out smoothly as an alternative to just bypassing or engaging the block. Let me show you what I mean. I'll play a chord with a harmonic tremolo bypassed, and then with LFO active switched to on, I'll engage the block and the effect will kick in instantly. As an alternative, what I could do is engage the LFO active to on from the off position. This will mean that it fades in slowly and more subtly. The same applies for disengaging the effect. If you select LFO active off, the harmonic tremolo effect will gradually fade out. The speed at which the harmonic tremolo fades in and out is determined by the fade in and also fade out parameters on the second page. Here's how it sounds with a quicker fade in and out. Alternatively, here's a longer fade in and a longer fade out. Now let's reset these parameters by double-clicking them and move on to the boost parameter. By default, this is set at 100, and this just gives the harmonic tremolo a bit of a signal boost and drives the amp slightly. Here's how it sounds with the boost first at 0%. And here's how it sounds giving a subtle boost at 100%. Finally, we have the low pass crossover and high pass crossover controls. These determine the frequency crossover points at which the lows and highs are modulated. If these values are further apart, you'll have a much more drastic harmonic tremolo effect. If these frequency values are closer together, you'll have a much more subtle harmonic tremolo effect. So that's a quick look at the controls of the harmonic tremolo. It really comes into its own when paired with other devices from Quad Cortex. Here's a quick preset to show you how it sounds in context. The next new device we're going to take a look at is the Chief OC2. Let's load this onto the grid by tapping an empty space, going down to Pitch, and selecting Chief OC2. Opening it up with the default settings, it sounds like this. As you can hear, this is a device that lets us have control over 3 different octaves of my guitar signal. We have the dry, which is the pitch of my guitar. We have octave -1, which is an octave below my dry guitar signal. And finally, octave -2, which is 2 octaves below my dry guitar signal. To demonstrate how these sound, for now, I'm just going to set the mix of my dry to 0%. Now you're hearing the mix of octave -1 and octave -2. Here's how it sounds with just the -1 octave engaged. Conversely, if I set this to 0% and bring in octave -2 at 100%, here's how octave -2 sounds. And here's how it sounds with octave -1 and octave -2, both at 100%. Of course, we can then bring in our dry guitar input to taste. Finally, we then have an output dial, giving us control over the master volume of the effect. There's an additional pitch device added in CorOS 3.1.0 called the subharmonic synth. Let's add it to the grid by selecting an empty space, going into the pitch devices, and then selecting subharmonic synth. With all of the default settings, here's how it sounds. The subharmonic synth is designed to add harmonics below the fundamental note of your dry guitar signal. In other words, filling out the low end. By nature of the device, it's going to make the most sense to go through each of these parameters one at a time because we're dealing with such low frequencies. Our first parameter is for our dry guitar signal, so we can blend that in. Let's set it at around 50%, and here's how that sounds. We can then bring in an octave below of our dry signal. To really exaggerate this, I'm going to set it at 100%. And here's how that sounds. Next, I'm going to set the percentage of my dry parameter to 100%. This is because the following parameters, character, low, and sub, all depend on the percentage values of the dry and octave parameters. Starting with the character parameter, as we increase this, we're going to get a bit more mid-range and forwardness to the sound. Here's how it sounds at 100%. For now, I'm going to take character back down to 0%. And moving on to the low parameter, this is going to act as more of a low-end EQ control. So as you increase it, there'll be more body and weight to the sound. First, here's how my tone sounds with low at 0%. Here's how it sounds with low at around 50%. And here's low at 100%. As you can hear, this is quite a vivid control and has a lot of power over the weight and forwardness of that low end. For now, let's bring it back to 0% and move on to the sub parameter. The sub parameter is going to add harmonics underneath your fundamental guitar signal, filling out the low end. Here's how it sounds with sub at 0%. Here's sub at 50%. And finally, here's sub at 100%. Finally, we have an output dial, giving us a master volume control over the device. So that's a quick look at how all of these parameters in isolation can affect the low end of your guitar sound. Now let's blend them together to create a rich, thick, low end heavy tone. As you can hear, this is an extremely powerful device that can add thickness, weight, and power to your guitar or bass tones. Let's take a look at the next device, the Crying Wah from Hell. Let's add it to the grid by tapping in an empty space, going into Wah, and selecting Crying Wah from Hell. I've got my expression pedal hooked up on the floor, and it's assigned to the Crying Wah from Hell. So let's hear how this sounds. The first parameter, wah, corresponds to the position of the wah pedal, whether that be physically on the expression pedal or virtually on the wah device. The range controls the frequencies that the wah will sweep through. If we dial the range back, this means that the wah will have a narrower sweep. Resetting this back to 1, we now move on to the Q parameter. This Q parameter controls the width of the wah filter. At smaller values, the wah filter will be very narrow. Here's how that sounds. As we increase this, we're going to have a broader band for the wah to sweep with. Here's how it sounds at around 0.7. Bringing this back up to 1, we then move on to the fine tune control. This control adjusts the high frequencies in the toe down position of the wah. So with it at 1, here's how it sounds. As I bring this back, we're going to get a darker sound. This allows you to attenuate those higher abrasive frequencies if you wish to take them out. Resetting this control back to 1, we then have a boost toggle switch. This allows us to add a boost to the signal when we engage the wah, giving you an extra lift for solo sections. With it off, here's how it sounds. As I engage this, you'll see we now have the boost level option available. Here, we can dial in a set number of dBs for an extra volume boost. Here's how it sounds with it set to 9 decibels. This is just given an extra boost to the front end of my signal. We can go all the way up to 17 decibels. Here's how that sounds. And that is the crying wah from hell. So there's a look at the new devices included in this CorOS 3.1.0 update. This CorOS update means that Soldano SLO100X is now compatible with Quad Cortex. So let's take a look. I'm going to go into the directory. At the top left, go down and select plugin presets from the drop-down menu. And you'll see here, I can select Soldano SLO100X and then the default preset. As you can see, we have all of the elements of the plugin here on the grid ready to use. Here's how the default preset sounds. So let's go through the signal chain. We start off with the noise gate that's engaged, and after that, we then have the transpose. I can engage this and drop the pitch of my guitar by 2 semitones. Let's hear how that sounds. Resetting this by double tapping it, I'm going to bypass it and move on to the compressor. Let's engage it and hear how it sounds with all the default settings. As you can hear, that's given me a subtle boost and compression just to even out my playing. Now, let's move on by bypassing that to the Soldano SLO Overdrive 1. Let's engage it and hear how it sounds. Bypassing this, let's move on to Overdrive 2 and engage it. Here's how it sounds. As you can hear, these overdrives give us different flavors to add drive and push into the front end of the Soldano amp. For now, I'm going to disengage this and move on to the SLO100 chorus. Let's bring it in, and here's how it sounds. This device gives you options to add depth and modulation to your sound. I'll bypass it for now and move on to the Soldano SLO100 amp. As you can see, we have all of the amp's plugin parameters here available now on Quad Cortex. The first of which is the channel switch. Currently, we've been in the OD channel. That sounds like this. I can select normal via this toggle switch, allowing access to the crunch and clean channels. Here's how crunch sounds with all the default settings. And now I'll select the clean channel with this toggle switch, and here's how that sounds. As you can hear, this is an incredibly versatile amp. Let's set it back to crunch and move on. Next, we move on to the SLO100 cab that's available in mono and stereo versions. When opening this up, you'll see that we have all of the studio level control over the cabinet as we do in the plugin. So let's engage the room left and room right for some more ambience. I'm going to disengage these for the meantime and move on. Next we have the EQ. This gives us the same 9-band EQ control as well as the high and low pass filters that we would in the plugin. Next up we have the plugin doubler. This delays one side of the stereo signal, creating a double tracked effect. As I engage it, this is how it sounds. I'll bypass this for now, and moving on, we have the SLO100 delay. Here's how it sounds with all the default settings. Disengaging this, I'll move on to the final element in the plugin, the SLO100 reverb. Here's how it sounds with that engaged. And there we have it. That's all of the new devices to Quad Cortex added with Soldano SLO100X compatibility. Now I've loaded up the leader preset by Neural DSP so we can hear how this all sounds dialed in. So there we have it. There is Soldano SLO100X running natively on Quad Cortex. The Fortin Nameless Suite X is now compatible with Quad Cortex as part of this CorOS update. Let's take a look. To load it, I'm going to go into the directory. From the drop-down menu at the top left, select Plugin Presets, and then select Fortin Nameless Suite X, and then the default preset. We can see all of the elements of the plugin running here natively on Quad Cortex. So here's how the default preset sounds. So let's take a look at each of these devices, starting with the plugin gate. And this is set to -70, but I'll leave this disengaged for now and move on to the transpose. And I'm going to engage this and drop it down 4 semitones. Let's hear how that sounds. Next, let's move on to the Fortin Zool. This is the gate designed by Fortin to keep aggressive rhythm sounds nice and tight and free of noise. If I bypassed it, here's how it would sound. So for now, I'm going to leave it engaged at the default setting of 3.5. Next, let's move on to the Fortin Hex Drive. If I engage this, here's how it sounds with those current settings. Next up is the Fortin Grind. This is a great always-on pedal that just adds that aggression into the front end of the amp. To hear what it's adding, I'm first going to bypass it. And here's how it sounds re-engaged. So you can hear there, it's shaping the character of our sound really nicely. For that example, it was great to have the hex drive engaged, but for now, I'm going to bypass it and move on to the Fortin Nameless amp. Here's how it sounds with all of the default settings. As you can see, we have all the same control over this ferocious metal amplifier as we do in the plugin. It sounds great out of the box, so let's move on. Next, we move on to the Nameless cab that's available in both mono and stereo versions. And we have all of the same studio level control over the cab as we do in the plugin. The next block in the signal chain is the EQ. Here we have the 9-band graphic EQ, along with the high and low pass filters and a master output on the second page. Next we have the plugin doubler. This allows us to have a double-tracked guitar effect by delaying one of the sides in the stereo image. Here's how it sounds. For now, I'm going to disengage this and move on to the Nameless delay. Here's how it sounds with all of its default settings. I'll bypass this and move on to the final block in the signal chain, the Nameless reverb. Here's how it sounds engaged with all of its default settings. So those are all of the new devices that have come to Quad Cortex through plugin compatibility with the Fortin Nameless Suite X. I've loaded up this crunchy rhythm preset to show you how this plugin can sound dialed in. And there you have it, that's the Fortin Nameless Suite X running natively on Quad Cortex. Now let's play through some presets from Soldano SLO100X and the Fortin Nameless Suite X running on Quad Cortex. There are also some updates to devices as part of this version of CorOS. Let's start with the US DLX65 reissue. This replaces the vibrato and normal versions of this amp. So let's tap an empty space on the grid, select amp, and then scroll down to US DLX65 reissue. I'm also going to pair it with a complementary cab. Upon opening this up, you'll see that we have a mode drop-down menu where we have the option to select normal and vibrato, corresponding to the US DLX normal and vibrato models. We also have a vibrato bright off mode. First, let's hear how the vibrato mode sounds. Next, let's hear the vibrato bright off mode. And finally, let's hear the normal mode. So, as you can see, we still have access to the normal and vibrato models, as well as the vibrato bright off model, but now we can use them all in one block on Quad Cortex, taking up less space on the grid. An advantage of this is that we can have 3 amps and switch between them in scene mode all in the one block. Here, in Scene A, I've assigned the mode to normal. Scene B is the vibrato mode, and C is the vibrato bright off mode. The envelope filter has been updated to include a frequency depth control. Let's load this up on the grid. I'm going to tap an empty space, select filter, and then envelope filter. When opening it up, you'll see that there's now a frequency depth control, and this controls the frequency limit of our envelope filter. Here's how it sounds with all of the current settings. If I roll this back, you're going to get a darker envelope filter sound. And as I increase this, you're going to get a much brighter envelope filter. And that covers it for the updated devices in CorOS 3.1.0. So that was a deep dive into the CorOS 3.1.0 update for Quad Cortex. We hope you enjoy the new devices, features, and compatibility with additional plugins. This update is available to download now. For more information about CorOS and Quad Cortex, head on over to neuraldsp.com. I'm John Connearn, thanks for watching.